everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Glad Trad podcast. I'm Rodolfo Carlos.
How's it going? I'm Jordan Pacheco.
Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about the demographics of the extraordinary form today. But first, I wanted to thank you all. As I mentioned in my previous video on the roles of a husband, or rather the role of the husband, my father was in the hospital and he actually passed away. So I thank you very much for your prayers and your continued prayers also for the repose of his soul. And keep in mind also all the other holy souls in purgatory. I think that's something that we have to remember pretty often. Charles Coulomb mentioned that actually. So yeah, keep that in mind. Pray for those holy souls. Yeah. Jordan, how are you doing? How's wedding planning going?
Wedding planning is going fine, and my
coming up.
It's coming up, dude. It's coming up. I wanted to real quick just hit that. I offer my Eucharist at Mass for the repose of your father's soul, and I encourage our listeners to please take this week, and when you receive Holy Communion, if you're able to, just please offer that, especially for the repose of your father's soul. You know, we trust in God's justice, but also in God's mercy, certainly.
True.
So anyway, as for wedding prep, which you asked, dude, I'm ready to be freaking married already. I've never, it's so funny because I remember when Jen and I first got engaged, Jen was like, we should take our engagement in stride. Like, I want to really feel it. And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I want to feel what it's like to be an engaged man. I'm so done. So wedding prep is going great. We have so many of our tentpole stuff down. We're getting our little details down. I'm T-minus 4 months from being where you are, which is a married man. And one thing that our priest told us is that he's like, you got to be good and prudent and careful because it gets harder, not easier, the closer you get to the finish line. And it's true. Not like completely all physical stuff, but just thinking, I'm like, man, driving Jen home, I'm like, it's just going to be so nice when we just don't have to do this anymore.
Right.
It's going to be so nice when I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to bed. And she's like, okay, I'm going to stay here on the couch and watch some TV. And I'd be like, all right, cool. It's going to be cool not to have to lock doors. Like, there's just a lot of stuff I'm just so excited for. Oh, man.
It's true. When Ashley and I were getting close to the date, all kinds of stuff started going wrong. And Father Friar, he talks about how we shouldn't attribute every little problem to demons and stuff. And right. I think that's true. I think you have to be very careful because it's not always that. But man, there is some spiritual warfare going on because there's all kinds of stuff trying to distract you. And yeah, I know how you feel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, God bless you and Ashley because you guys went through the ringer. Having a wedding in June in California, like my great respect goes out to you guys because Jen and I pushed ours back, and y'all were like, "No, we're doing this." And with a happy wife and with a child on the way and all that kind of stuff, just how overjoyed it must be. Like, I'm so happy for you guys. I honestly, like, you guys
Thanks,
are great marital inspiration.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, man. All you got to do is get out of California. Heaven's sake.
Yeah.
All in God's time.
Yeah. I don't know where we're going to go now.
Texas.
Yeah, we'll text it.
I'll see you in is it Daniel Boone who said, "To hell with y'all, I'm going to Texas," or whatever? If you know in the chat, please correct me if I'm wrong. So, in this time of COVID, for our audience, I'm sure everyone's aware, mass attendance has collapsed. There is a great crisis in the church right now. Obviously, we are now seeing a lot of people have to really take their faith and hold it for dear life. There are priests and there are bishops who are fighting the good fight, who are trying to open up parishes, who have their parishes open, who have their churches open, their dioceses open. And there are priests and bishops who have essentially abandoned the faith, the supernatural faith, and plenty of fellows. And I keep meeting Catholics. Maybe you do too, Rudy, but I keep meeting Catholics, particularly Novus Ordo Catholics, because that's oftentimes where the hemorrhage is the greatest. They say that
Mm-hmm.
only 5% of Catholics right now are attending Mass. And before the pandemic, only 25% were attending. So I'm playing a lot of board games with my friends who are Catholics, have been Catholic their whole life. And they're talking to me about how this is such a struggle because they feel like the church has really left them out to dry in a lot of ways. That they're treated as if they're suspects, guilty of some terrible, horrible disease, right? They're treated worse than the lepers, where Jesus went out and healed the lepers and touched them and interacted. The church is like, oh, you don't have a reservation, you can't come. Well, you have to wear a mask, all that kind of stuff. And it's now March, and Protestants are winning their battles, and the Catholic Church won't. And so it's really genuinely scandalizing a lot of people. There are a lot of people who I had a friend the other day who said, I'll always be a Catholic, but like I don't know if I can stay in the church right now. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she was like, well, it just seems like I know that this is all BS. I know this is wrong. And how do we fight it? But it's like everywhere I look, it's always the clergy and then other lady who are just telling me, no, no, no. If you think those thoughts, you're a bad Catholic or something.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
really,
I feel that too.
yeah,
Uh, when it comes to my dad, he went to a Catholic hospital, and they wouldn't let me in to see him. They wouldn't let a priest go into the room. And what is really weird about it is they would let non-Catholic chaplains into the room, which was very odd. I don't understand why,
hmm,
because I had talked to the priest and I said, listen, my dad's been away from the sacraments for a very long time, and I'm most concerned about his soul, like the
yeah,
state of his soul, and his eternity. And he says, okay, well, I'll see what I can do. And, that was promising. And then I got a call from him, and he's like, this is what he said. And I don't want to scandalize people, but he said, these are his direct words. He said, you don't have to worry about your dad's spiritual health. He is completely 100% spiritually healthy after what I did. And I said, what did you do? He's like, well, I gave him a spiritual anointing of the sick. And I said, what? I was saying to myself, like, what is that? That doesn't sound right.
that's not a thing.
Well, it turns out he didn't go into the room. He couldn't go into the room. My dad was unconscious, so I don't even know if he even received anything, but he didn't go into the room at all. And then after that, I could never get a hold of him, because the second time I called him, I said, hey, I've confirmed with other priests and this isn't even a thing. Like, what did you do? So yeah, no, I totally feel it, because it's not just my dad. Think about everybody else who's in a Catholic hospital who can't even see a priest.
Right.
That's so sad. And it's true, like you said, they view us as if we're some sort of leper, but it's the reverse, because if you look into the scriptures, people went out. Well, if you look in the scriptures, people avoided the lepers. That's true.
Right.
But what I mean to say is there have been saints who went out of their way to go and to serve the lepers. I mean, Christ himself. But also there's other saints who have gone out and sacrificed their life for these people who really needed, above all things, not just their physical health, but their spiritual health tended to.
Yeah.
And it's just so sad. I mean, I'm not surprised that the church is hemorrhaging so much. This is just one small aspect, but think about all the other things. I mean, this is a sign of a very deep rot that we're starting to see.
In a way, one of the silver linings from this is that that you have to be in the true church because the devil is attacking so hard. And on the other side, the rot is so deep and it might seem overwhelming. I think it just shows, again, it's the cadaver synod of the modern era. We're just parading this corpse around, these men who pretend to hold the supernatural faith, these institutions that pretend to hold the supernatural faith. And then when push comes to shove, when we ask them to be really Christ-like and be heroic in their witness, they don't do it. And
no,
we're not saying as Christians, our lives are gifts from God. It's not to throw all caution to the wind and all that kind of stuff, but it is to fundamentally trust so radically in the love of Jesus, to realize that our lives, because they're gifts from God, can be forfeit at any instant. And if it's going to be forfeit, if we are dust and unto dust we shall return, then it's up to us to go, I will go out to the lepers. I will go out and make sure that I can actually anoint the sick, There's not a
Yeah.
spiritual anointing of the sick. Oh, you don't have to worry about your father. Like the disingenuous nature of what we've done with the sacraments. And so now, right, there have been Catholics who have not been to confession in a year. They've not received the sacraments in a year. The prerequisites of the church, the six precepts of the church, have just gone completely out the window.
Right.
A an eternal dispensation, apparently, in some places, and you're seeing the great scandal of the faith. And so I'm not surprised. I'm saddened, but I'm not surprised when Catholics go, well, the Protestant church next to me has been open, and they're fighting, and they're so active about it, and they're so radical when they talk about their love of Jesus Christ and bringing the
Hmm.
gospel, and they will fight it. And the church is a church that our history is full of fighters. The saints are always fighters. And so I've been really meditating on St. Catherine of Siena, who's a relatively new saint for me to understand her story, because what
Hmm.
St. Catherine did is she's the one who helped end the Avignon papacy. And
Right. She
she
admonished one
Mm-hmm.
of the popes.
She admonished
Hmm.
the Pope, and she said, essentially, you must be reminded of your rank. You're not just a man, you are a prince of the apostles now. And it's
Right.
bigger than you. And you have an obligation to the faithful to do your job, essentially. And like in like the most Chad way ever. What a boss. Do your job. And so, for all Catholic, for any Catholic who's listening, who maybe your parish has been closed, or maybe the restrictions are so draconian still, um, please, please, please look at your other options in the Catholic Church. Don't give up on the faith. Do not give up on the church. Don't let the evils of men disturb your inner peace, right? Be a thief of peace, which is a phrase Rudy taught me. There are so many churches and there's so many priests who really want to offer the sacraments, who really believe and want to fight. And maybe they're not always the most outward, right? One of the differences, of course, is leadership. And Archbishop Aquila out here, he
Hmm.
has a good relationship with the fraternity, and with a lot of priests who are just doing their thing. So the fraternity has been exploding as it has been at St. Vitus in California. But it's much more close under the fact that the Archbishop understands that there is a salvation of souls at stake. Um, I think that it can be, the fraternity has a different approach, of course, in Los Angeles, because I feel like, we don't have that relationship with Gomez, quite frankly.
No, we're also under the magnifying glass most of the time.
Exactly.
And the archdiocese, I don't know if it's the archbishop himself, but they send their spies,
Mhm.
and they keep an eye on us. So
Well,
we have to play along, but
Father Jackson out here has been turned into the health department 6 times. He's had conversations with them 6 times. Like
yeah, I
he has them
remember.
on speed dial. Um, the founder of the Augustine Institute, Tim Gray, talks about a lot of times in his daily reflections how this pandemic has aged the church a decade and a half. And that's completely true. Again, we talk about how mass attendance is at 5%. It's an abysmal low. I mean, the dust is going to really, really settle, and we're going to have to ask what we've done. But it's funny because since this has aged the church a decade and a half, this has been an explosion hand over foot for the extraordinary form. This has been an explosion across tons of Latin mass communities, not just here in the United States, but across the world. And I think what we understand from that, of course, is that when you have the philosophy and the theology in place that makes you recognize the supremacy of the sacraments, the necessity of the sacraments, you are more likely to go out there and make sure the sacraments are dispensed upon the faithful. You're not going to just shut your doors and cower under your bed. But I do
Mhm.
believe that it's not just exclusively just Latin Mass, but I think again it's the great tradition of the church manifest in
Exactly.
the Mass, right? That really
Right.
makes
Right.
priests heroic witnesses to the faith.
There's just more to it than the Latin Mass. The Latin Mass is what's unifying us. But like you said, it's the tradition of the church that is alive and well, that you see in traditional parishes. It's not just the information of the last 50 years. I think a lot of the churches that we see today who are not offering the traditional mass, um, it's almost as if they see. everything that happened after the Second Vatican Council, and they see that as like the only way to operate. There's no sense of the tradition, the magisterium of the church over 2,000 years. It's very new, and that's why oftentimes maybe feel is the wrong word, but oftentimes you kind of sense that the liturgy that you attend at a Novus Ordo parish is very dated. I think we've talked about this
Oh yeah.
before.
Yeah.
Like the music, the sort of hammy style of like entertaining the crowd that a priest has as as sort of like a role.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all of those things are very of a certain time period, and it lacks roots. Its roots in tradition. I mean, that's a very bold statement, so I'll leave it at that. But
This is
take that with a grain of salt.
well, look at this. So I'll tell you this right now. Even what's happening in the Novus Ordos here in Colorado, they are not the same as the ones of my childhood. Even in New Mexico, in northern New Mexico, what I'm seeing is the candles are back on the altar.
Wow.
There is Ad Orientem is coming back. I think that is the first thing that you're going to see in Novus Ordo churches that goes back to tradition, right? I think
Hey,
that
we should do our podcast at
Ad
Orient.
Orientem. Okay, well, I think that no, we have to be towards the people. We have to be towards the people so that the priest can be towards God, as we are. So,
Right.
I know it's incredibly exciting, and I really, really am excited because I think that the church is going through a crunch. It's going to be smaller, but the fire that's within right now and the tools that we as traditionalists especially have to go forward. And so I'll get into this article a little bit. So forgive me if I butcher some of these naming schemes, but this is from HPR Web, which is the Homiletic and Pastoral Review. I've not really been with them, but it says America's foremost pastoral publication since 1900. So, you might roll your eyes as a trad at the word pastoral until you hear the word 1900. So, take it with what you will. This is an article called The Demographics of the Extraordinary Form, Young People, Families, Sex Ratios, and Diversity, written on the 14th of January of this year by Dr. Robert Shaw. And so what happened is it was a methodology, an international methodology conducted by the Federatio Internationalis Una Voce, or the FIUV, which are some dudes, and they submitted this report to the Holy See. Okay, so this is not just like some random dudes doing stuff. This is a report that went up to the Vatican, and part of the paragraph.
Oh, by the way, Jordan,
so,
I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Una Voce has been around since 1964. They were actually pushing for the Latin Mass.
Oh, really? Okay.
After the council.
So thank you. So that's a piece of history I didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's actually a parishioner at Vitus who used to work with them, and I wish I would know a little bit more about what that was like, but yeah, there's probably stories there.
Oh my gosh, find him. I feel like I have maybe not an article or something about Una Voce now thinking about it in some of the trad magazines that I have lying around this freaking place. But thank you to Una Voce. You guys are doing God's holy work then. And so the point of this data is, before you get to like the breakdowns of things, and it's a very, very detailed report. I highly recommend you read it. But this paragraph here says this. These data support the often heard characterization of the EF, the extraordinary form, as having a particular strong attraction for young people and families. I shall further draw on the report and other sources to show that the EF congregations generally have a more balanced sex ratio than those in the ordinary form, and to reveal the capacity of the EF to engage diverse ethnic and linguistic groups. There are two things here, Rudy, before we even get into it, that we should definitely discuss, because oftentimes detractors will say this: well, the Latin Mass is only going to attract white European males, right? That's the only one, old white European males. And considering that you and I both are not old white European males, I think it's funny when you go to a Latin Mass and you go, wow, there are actually there are a lot of different sorts of peoples here. Wherein even with diverse communities in the Novus Ordo churches, like the church that we both went to in the ordinary form had three different masses, right? But it's English, it was Spanish, and it was Vietnamese. And so you didn't see that interaction of all the different ethnic groups, I feel.
No, it was separate actually. One of the things, because I was in the parish council, and one of
Susan.
the problems we were having was that the Vietnamese community liked to be on their own, and we were trying to incorporate them into the greater role of the parish, and it was difficult, but it was because they were so tight knit, and it was almost like a whole different sort of community. It was interesting, but
Yeah.
yeah, in the traditional rite, there's so many different people, and the cool thing is that they interact, um, less so from like, oh well, I'm Vietnamese, I like to be around Vietnamese people. They
Mm-hmm.
interact more like, hey, I love being Catholic, I love Christ, let's talk about it. Super nice people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I talk with a priest reached out to me on Facebook, and he's a black priest from Chicago. I can't get him
Mm,
on the podcast. He refuses to do it. I'm so mad. So I'm gonna keep trying. It might take us a couple of years. Black priest from Chicago who learned the extraordinary form and is now in the Philippines teaching the extraordinary form to Filipino priests.
cool.
Like like honestly, like yeah, that right, that story writes itself. And so it's so funny to me because part of what makes the Latin Mass so rich and what makes Ad Orientem in particular so rich is that it's not about the priest. So the great thing, the great compliment is that you're never supposed to notice what priest is saying mass. The back of the heads all look the same. Now, obviously, we know what priest is saying mass, but it doesn't matter if they're black, if they're white, if they're Asian, and you don't expect there to be like these different variations of homiletics or different variations of how they're going to conduct the mass. Oftentimes we have the stereotype in the Catholic Church that if we have an immigrant priest, he's probably going to be better, especially if he's from Africa, than my old white priest from the East Coast or whatever it is, you know. And it's a great credit to the extraordinary form and the sort of fraternities and societies and things that it creates, because I don't feel like that's a problem. I feel like I'm going to get a solid homily regardless of the background of my priest, which is precisely what the church is about.
Exactly. So that's demographics, and then they also talk about, the breakdown in ages,
Mm-hmm.
which is really interesting.
Right.
It obviously leans towards the youth,
Mm-hmm. So
which is like sort of a reverse Woodstock. It's like a reaction against the 60s and everything about it.
so I'll tell you this right now. So there is it breaks it down again. It's not just a North American survey. It breaks down not just by continent, it even does region. So there's a
Mhm.
header here which is who attends the extraordinary forum, and it's the dominant demographics of extraordinary forum congregations. A lot of science nerd statistics information, but of course the summary in the bottom says this. With some variations between continents and regions, the results make clear that a very strong association between celebrations of the extraordinary form and young people and families. And this and families part is so crucial because if your church ain't crying, it's dying. And how many times have we gone and unfortunately seen a very, very pretty church with a very aged population? And some people speculate that that's one of the reasons why the church has reacted in the whole COVID mess as it has, because we have an aging church that we're not replacing our numbers, except when it comes especially to the extraordinary form. So it says the percentage of dioceses where extraordinary form congregations are identified as predominantly old is in no region greater than 11.1%. In no region of these places surveyed across the globe, these dioceses, right? These are diocese wide surveys, is your ancient population greater than 1 in 10. The percentage where young people and families or families is identified as predominant is 72% in North America, 69.2 in Central Europe, 62.3% in South America, 60.4 in Asia, 57.5% in Oceania, 55.5% in Northeast Europe, 51.7% in Northwest Europe, 31.7% in Southern Europe. So we got to really work on Italy, which doesn't surprise me. And 28.6% in Africa. So, I mean, what this
This
speaks
gives
to,
me hope.
yeah, tell them.
This gives me a lot of hope because it's obviously skewed to younger families, And younger families are taking up the role of restoring the church. We're going to see that. I mean, that's what I hope for my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
to see her go off and start a traditional family. Like,
Oh,
that's amazing.
yeah.
And it really shows that despite all of the problems that we have in the church right now, that God, it seems as if, obviously, I'm saying this based off of the data, it seems as if there's a plan here. Like, God is giving us a little insight here. Like, this is the future. The future is tradition,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to happen with all of the young people. And a lot of the older people, they're getting closer to the time of their death, right? So a little bit of there's going to be a little bit of change, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah. Yeah. And
But
one thing to keep in mind is this. So across the world, it's true. The extraordinary form is a very small percentage of all masses celebrated. But
mhm.
and so oftentimes you'll hear these characters, oh, well, don't worry about the Latin masters. It's just a small but very loud demographic. Here's the problem.
Mhm.
Demographics don't lie, which is why we're saying the church in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years is going to look drastically different because of the numbers of good Catholics and baptized Catholics and now born Catholics who are just into tradition. For your daughter, Rudy, and for the children of Jen and I, they're going to be the first in our families to be raised in the old rite, since our grandparents were children in a way. And so that's terribly exciting. And so the question people ask is, well, surely tradition or this whole Latin massing, it's just a flash in the pan that really we're going to go to some melding of the two forms and it's going to be good. But the problem is what we're seeing, especially because none of us were there during the council. None of us were there during the changes. None of us were there during any part of that. You know, we were born in the late 80s and the 90s, for heaven's sake. What we're seeing is that there is obviously a higher retention rate of the Catholic faith in traditional families. And I think that the reason why is because there is this greater encouragement of Christ-centric relationships, that the father is the head of his wife, he just as Christ is the head of the church, that he leads the family in prayer, that his wife governs the children, that they look after each other, you know what I mean, the two become one, and that holy days obligation, fasting, the life of the saints, all these, you're not just like a cultural Catholic anymore, but you are now
Right.
actually a Catholic engaged in the culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's totally true. And these little cells of well, these families will become sort of little bastions, you know. So that's going to be cool. That
Mm-hmm.
gives me hope.
One really interesting thing is they talk about gender balance in this, and so um, this is something that's uber huge. So on the ordinary form side, the article says there is an abundant evidence from the USA and England and Wales that women outnumber men at celebrations. Do you know what the ratio is?
Is it? I think it was 2 to 1, right?
Yeah, it's 2 to 1.
2 to 1.
Uh huh.
That's
Right,
crazy. No
and
wonder. Do you remember in the young adult group at the other church, all the girls were like, "Where are the good Catholic guys?
uh
Where are
huh. Oh,
they?"
that's well. I'm with them. I feel for them. I feel for them. I do feel for them. But they're all in the Latin Mass, my dude.
Well, it's true. I mean, if it's 2 to 1, then
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty scarce,
That's
maybe.
right. And imagine what kind of, not to mischaracterize every guy who still attends the ordinary form, of course. Um,
No, no.
but of course not. We have,
You're just effeminate. You're just an effeminate loser.
being
You know,
good.
you don't have your priorities straight,
Oh my
and
gosh.
you're just going along with the wave,
Well,
man.
this is simple as
You're
that.
going
It's
with the
that
water.
in a lot of churches and all across the church, there's this great attack on masculinity across the culture and the great attack on femininity, the authentic expressions of both of them. What God
Mhm.
means for us to be man, what God means for us to be woman. And so what we see a lot of times is the rule of my parish priest, he calls it, it's a rule of what did he say? He said communism, modernism, and feminism are the three isms that have ruined. Pope Benedict actually talks about this in his relativism. Um,
Right.
and so what's funny about that is I think a lot of times about if you're a guy attending mass and you're trying to find your way out and the hymns don't appeal to you and it's always these pantsuited ladies up on the altar and the priest is just a community organizer and I almost expect out of Novus Ordo that the altar servers are going to be girls. Because why would you as a boy, they do studies on this. It's not
Right.
surprising. Like, why would you do with the same activity that your little sister can do? And
Right.
especially if the point of altar serving is to help foster vocations, or one of the points is to help foster vocations amongst men, authentic masculinity in the priesthood, and you see Zippy Susan up there in her in her jeans underneath that white alb that they wear. Um,
Well, that's a feature, not a bug. You
yes.
know, and I think I think that's pushing a lot of guys who are thinking about vocations into tradition, which is really cool
Hmm.
because they'll be the next parish pastor at so and so parish,
Right.
and they'll be providing the Latin mass. You know what? I don't like it when people say the extraordinary form. Oh, I hate that
Oh, okay. Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
like no, it's not extraordinary. Like
Hmm.
this is the way it should be.
Yeah, this is the real ordinary,
What
the
it's
OG.
supposed to be.
Uh-huh. The OG.
OG.
This is what it's supposed to be. Well, it's funny because isn't it interesting that they decided that they weren't going to make a separate rite out of the Novus Ordo? That instead that there are, for the first time in Catholic history, two forms of the same rite, equal in dignity and this sort of thing. It's Plessy versus Ferguson, if you ask me. It's separate but equal, which of course means that they are separate but unequal. Um,
Right.
which is why it's like we chase after the unicorn of look. I'm Charles Clome pointed out that the the myth of the 20-minute low mass before the council was true, and I think that's a really important thing as trads need to remember. We did not always have it this good. There was not always fraternities and Institute of Christ the Kings and all these other organizations who were offering really really good liturgy.
Yeah.
um but I always maintain that that's what the council should have done. Essentially, the fraternity of St. Peter should have been birthed in the 60s instead of the 80s, I always maintain. Like
Mhm.
in this call of Vatican II for the great liturgical renewal, they should have actually put things in place to really foster that in. Instead, we threw the baby out with the bathwater in 1970. And so there are those who will say, well, the future of the church is bi-liturgical. A priest will be able to say both, and you can go to your both, and you can have your cake, and you can eat it too. But the problem is when there is such a philosophical divide on what the mass authentically and fundamentally is. If you find a priest or a bishop in particular who's, as a lot of them are nowadays, who are just kind of laissez-faire about if you attend the Latin mass or you attend the Novus Ordo, the Latin mass will just kind of keep doing this. There's not an equilibrium. We're not finding an equilibrium after all. The conciliar reform of the reformers, they're not gaining ground because all those guys were like, okay, we're just going to go to tradition. Like, what's the point? What are we reforming it towards? Until it rests in what it should be, which is the Latin Mass.
Right. Inevitably, it just goes back.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just arcs back. So
You will
you
always.
might as well get a head start and just leave your Novus Ordo parish.
That's what I'm saying to a lot of like new priests and seminarians is that you might as well get a head start and just really get comfortable at the very least now with Ad Orientem and communion on the tongue and altar rails. Um,
Hmm.
and then because that starts, and then what happens is they say, okay. And I saw this at my grandparents' little village church in New Mexico, so I know this is happening. And then they do Kyries. They're not Gloria to Gods, they're Glorias. They're not Holy, Holy, Holies, they're Sanctuses and Agnus Deis. And so you start putting those propers back in. And then before you know it, you say, hey, so altar serving is a vocation for boys in order for them to get inspired by the Holy Spirit to consider priesthood. Therefore, we're not only we're going to have just boy altar servers. You know, um, I think it's such a black pill, right? But St. Paul has kind of been banished very quietly. You notice this because St. Paul is like, women should remain quiet in church with their heads covered. And we've kind of swept that little part of the Bible under the rugs right next to wives be submissive to your husbands. We just focus on the husbands, love your wives, which is good and important. But you can't say that in polite society, you notice?
Dude, you know what? I've been listening to this podcast on Spotify. I don't know if it's anywhere else, but it's called Logos,
Mm-hmm.
Scribed and Spoken. And basically, what this guy is doing is he's reading the Dewey Rheims translation of the Latin Vulgate, and he is doing it so that you can read or listen to the scriptures like one day at a time. Like, so
Mm.
or you listen or read or whatever, read
Yeah.
along for a year, and you go through the whole Bible.
Oh, so it's a
And
Bible in a year, but the Dewey version.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And the cool thing is he's reading from the same translation that I have. You know, the Bible that I'm restoring.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, he's going through it, and sometimes he'll say things, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go look at it. And I have the Haydock commentaries, and the commentaries are so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was one the other day about, um, how Jesus is talking about that there was a man in the wedding, but he didn't have his wedding garment,
Yeah, that's right.
and so he was silent.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking the other day, I was like, what does that mean? I don't understand. And because I've never had it explained to me. So I
Mm-hmm.
look into the Haydock translation or the Haydock commentary, and it says it's a person who died without having died in a state of grace.
Mm.
So the grace is the wedding garment, and because he didn't have anything,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't say anything. So he was already condemned. So he couldn't speak for himself. That's why it said he stayed silent
Oh,
and then
shoot. Okay.
got cast out.
Yeah.
So I wonder. I have to go through and see what some of the Saint Paul sizzlers are. Like, what is it? What does it say here?
Well, it's funny how so there are three religions which grow, right? With traditional Catholicism, um, Islam, fundamental Islam, obviously, and Orthodox Judaism. And one of the reasons why is because again, there's just there are these great natural because they're the expression of men and women, entrenched understandings of men are men and women are women, and liturgy or service or whatever it is service, and this is what we do. And it's tradition. Then we build our entire culture and family around that. So I think the world again is just going to be divided between Catholics and Muslims at some point again. That the secularists and like or progressive Protestantism, which is hemorrhaging right now, just bleeding out, um, just
Yeah, they're on
terrible.
TikTok.
Yeah, well, fun fact, just for our audience, I read a blog called Juicy Ecumenism, which is written usually by like I guess I would call them traditional mainline Protestants, like high church Protestants, and they just talk about the woes that are going on in Protestantism right now. It's a very very good blog, and the United
That sounds like a
Methodists.
risque sort of website.
I know, right? I know, right? I know. I was like, well, my covenant eyes is gonna catch this one. If you I think it's important to always keep an eye on what's going on in Protestantism, just because you can see what
Yeah.
not to do. And we want a lot of Protestant brothers and sisters are crossing the Tiber right now because they're like, holy crap! Turns out Methodists, the United Methodists, are going through a schism. They're going through a split right now between traditional Methodists and liberal non-Christians. So
I
they're no
love it.
longer the United Methodists. They literally can't be the United Methodists. Um, which is kind of sad, but also looks like Protestantism lasted 500 years. There will be no, um, with how
I
some
mean,
denominations are dying out, we will have less denominations at this rate in 20 years.
but
Isn't that crazy?
that's just the logical conclusion. I mean,
Mm,
even what we're seeing today is a logical conclusion of Protestantism, because a lot of the reforms, so-called reforms, were to appease Protestants.
that's right.
And so, we shouldn't be very surprised when we see some of the same trends happening within the church, because honestly, in some parts of the church, it's no different
Yeah.
than the Methodist church,
If you
you
go to
know.
a Lutheran service, you might be really surprised on how parts of the Lutheran service feels really like some of the Novus Ordo, like a lot of the Novus Ordo.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
just in a
absolutely.
structure. And you're like, and meanwhile, Catholics who come from the Novus Ordo into Latin Mass feel like they're in a whole new world.
Right.
They're home. On my wedding website, we have a whole section on Latin Mass and resources and really to help ease a lot of our family members in. I come from a
That's
big
great.
Catholic family, but they're Novus Ordo, so I gotta kind of help them a little
Mhm.
bit. But I'm like, one of my things I'm trying to emphasize is this is your birthright. Like this is how I think about the woman the woman of the well. She says, talking about her father Jacob, I think it was, right. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain,
Mhm.
right? Jacob's well, and so I think about that with the Latin Mass. It's like our ancestors worshipped this way, and this is what and the Mass is the Mass, yes, but this is radically connects us to all the great saints that we've ever read about. This is the Mass that Sir Thomas More saw, and St. Catherine of Siena, and St. Augustine, and Thomas Aquinas. And how beautiful is that to really think about that line unbroken even to today. That's the church right there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's
um,
amazing.
so real quick before we move on from gender, I just wanted to point out real quick that yep, in extraordinary form, sorry Rudy, in Latin Mass congregations, it's it is the average would be about 55% men, 45% women. So this is where all the men are going, and it alternates. So you do get
Jesus.
slightly higher male participation, which makes sense, but there's obviously a lot of women. Women, generally speaking, tend to have a higher religiosity than men. It's, I don't want to say easier to keep women in the pews, because obviously, ladies, I understand that there are whole spiritual struggles and you're still human beings, obviously.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, congregations will skew towards women. And the more liberal or the more Protestant a congregation gets, the more that skews towards women. And I think it's kind of a flip of feminism, right? It's that going awry. It's a sin of Eve. And we're just trying to get back to like a right and proper liturgy, which is open up to men and to women, obviously, because a 55-45 is a really nice split. So if you want to find a man, ladies, you're looking in the wrong places. Go to the Latin Mass. Wear your mantilla. You'll be proposed to by midnight, I promise.
But
Um,
also, I hear that in the more traditional communities that I guess guys don't really. Maybe it's a sign of our sort of time or something. But most guys don't approach. So if you're a guy, learn how to approach
yeah,
a woman
it's so
and
funny.
ask her out. Don't be
Rudy,
such a jabroni,
it's
bro.
so funny that you say that. I was trying to make a single video yesterday and I just couldn't find the words I was trying to say, but I've told you about this. Might be the perfect place. I call it killing Dulcinea. Um, right? Have I ever told you this
When you say
theory?
Dulcinea, I think about your computer and also that video game Red Dead, because you
Yes.
named your horse that.
That's right. I named my horse Dulcinea in Red Dead Redemption, and my computer's name is Dulcinea. So poor Jen's like, oh, you're so obsessed. But generally speaking, this is it, right? So as men, we have this, we often pedestal or a woman. We fantasize, we project like what a life would be like without approaching her. So that's why guys like your barista draws a heart or makes one of those hearts in your coffee cup, and you're like, oh my
Like when
gosh,
she
this is the,
signs your name, like, what's your name?
uh-huh, yeah, that's right. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the perfect woman. Surely that's what it is. Um, and dudes, we have to learn how to be men, authentic men. We need to learn how to approach women properly again. But the biggest thing guys fear in the modern era, because we're such a comfortable peoples, is that rejection. Oh, I got a fear of rejection. I don't know how to approach girls. I'm just going to swipe on my phone and all that kind of crap. And you got to kill Dulcinea. Because here's the thing, Dulcinea is the most perfect woman in the world. She is kind, she is gentle, she is a high-born Catholic noble lady. She also doesn't exist. Like she is a manifestation of Dorotea of Toboso, who turns out to be kind of like a burly shepherd girl from the next village over. The Don Quixote like fantasizes about as this highborn lady. And so I'm not saying that there aren't, of course, highborn wonderful ladies. There obviously are, but they're obviously human too, you know. So
Right.
they're not the
Yeah.
marbled Aphrodite.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I mentioned that. I mean, there's more to attraction.
Hmm.
It's more than just being attracted to somebody. I mean, you got to think about, is this woman gonna get me to heaven? Is
Oh
this
yeah.
woman gonna is she gonna help me get my kids to heaven if
Hmm.
God entrusts me with kids? Like,
Right.
you got to think
Well,
about that.
it's even, and we're just starting on an even more basic level. If you see a cute girl in her little mantilla, and that's a great start, by the way, and you're like,
Little
oh,
mantilla.
well, like, or oh,
That's a
I'm sorry, I want like
mistake.
the right,
You
the
want
bigger
a big veil, bro.
the
That's what
bigger
you
the
want to look
veil,
out
the more
for.
pious the woman, right? Isn't that a
Yep,
proportionate thing?
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Big
Um,
veil.
guys, like people just gotta approach. Like I am so happy that people are having their little Chad babies, and we're like kind of half insulating and just future proofing, I should say, not insulating, but just future proofing, right? But I actually had a conversation with a guy who gave me that thing. He was like talking about how what he sees his life as, and he wants to know if he's like, I don't know if any woman would like kind of conform to that, because like I want to do work for the church, but I know that it doesn't like pay as well and stuff. And I'm like, dude, quit the hypergamy talk just for a second. Oh, find one first, you know, like go say hello first instead of then the steps will follow in place. You may not be compatible, and that's perfectly okay. There's obviously there's more compatibilities than just the faith necessarily that you should still be compatible on. But the faith is the best thing to be compatible on. Um,
And
I
you got
want
to
to
be
move.
honest too. Like you have to realize that your dreams don't necessarily line up with like reality. Like you
Yeah,
want to serve the church, you want to do everything, but you're not going to get paid enough. It's like, well, I hate to tell you this, bro, but maybe that's not the best thing for you if you're trying to start a family.
right.
Then your wife is going to have to go to work, and then you know,
Well,
then
even
there's going to be sacrifices with the kids and that sort of thing.
mm-hmm.
So
Well, even for us, right? It's like we talked about this in our and I think it was on our trad chat number 1, right, where we talked
try to
about
chat.
like, look, the ideal is, yeah, we would love to have a world society where single income households were just widely accepted and accessible like that. And for some people, that's
Mhm.
possible, that's viable, and for other people, it's a different situation. And it's not to shame. It's the same as people having children, just generally. God,
Oh
all
yeah.
children are blessings from God, and some families have 10, some families have 5, and some families have 2, and they don't have any inhibitors, any intrinsic evils blocking that. That's just might be the way it is.
Mhm.
And so we just have to be willing to kill Dulcinea. We have to be willing to go, this is the ideal, and that's really nice and perfect and great, but I have to be blessed with the resources which God has given me and the path which God is setting forth for me, and be really prudent about that in order to build his kingdom here on earth.
Of course. And look at yourself too in the mirror, man. Don't like pass the buck too much on your wife or your future wife or future girlfriend. Like
Right.
you probably have stuff you got to work on too. So
Gosh, honestly.
just
Honestly,
get
I mean,
over yourself and ask the girl out,
well,
man.
there's
Like
this look. It's like a
just do it.
fetishization, right? There's like I listen. I like the perfect trad wife, like pedestal thing. Don't get me wrong whatsoever. Like if I could,
Yeah, it's
if I
nice.
could, I think look, Jen wears a lot of dresses, and I freaking love them. If it was up to me, she would wear nothing but dresses, right? And heels, and her feet wouldn't hurt at the end of the night. But then, of course, but Jen's a human, right? And so she's not like my robot, but she is my helper, my partner. She will be, I should say, my helper, my partner, my companion. And you have to take her, and she has hopes, dreams, wants, and she I, and you know, I'm sure that she snores. Looks like we're gonna have to figure that one out the hard way. So,
I found out I snore, dude.
yo,
Sucks.
actually, Jen says I snore. I'll
Yeah.
take like a nap someplace, not with her because obviously I'm a good Catholic who loves Jesus. She'll be
Yeah,
like
don't
driving up, you
cohabitate,
napping. She'll be
dude.
like, "Yeah, you snore," and I'm like, "Oh, you know, you snore, so whatever." Uh, um,
Apnea.
what'd you say?
It's called apnea.
Apnea. Thank you. I got a condition.
It's a condition, okay? It's
um,
very serious.
so this is an interesting one, and I was wondering about this one myself because I think this is a lot to do with the area which your extraordinary. I'm sorry, Rudy, where your Latin mass finds itself. I'm just reading the article, but it talks about the church's favorite buzzword right now, which is diverse congregations. Um, and
Can do without it.
I know, right? But this is where it's interesting. It talks about how the Latin Mass has an ability to attract a wide range of ethnic and linguistic groups. That's completely true. Uh, as an Italian contributor to this report explained, his local Latin Mass is frequented by people of all ages, several young couples with children, often Oriental, Sri Lankan, or even African, which are Congolese. And so there's a Canadian correspondent who talks about there are many young adults and seniors. Those attending also come from many national and ethnic backgrounds: Canadian, American, British, Chinese, Filipino, Indonesian, Vietnamese, Indian, Polish, German, South African, Australian, Korean, Trinidadian, Brazilian, Salvadorian, Mexican, Ivory Coast. And it goes on just to talk about how, for a lot of people who might be immigrating, oftentimes in the case of our country, from a more traditional culture to a less traditional culture, the tradition of the mass is what binds things together. And so
Hmm.
I like how it talks, especially not just about ethnic groups, but linguistic groups, because there's not the problem, as we were talking about earlier, with like 3 different masses and 3 different languages and all that stuff.
Although I will say too, like when I was really starting to come back into the church, I would go to the Spanish mass because oftentimes the Spanish mass The Spanish Mass was a little bit more. It was a little bit more grounded.
Yep.
Like it was less happy clappy. It was more
Really?
like, yeah. And surprisingly, this was at the cathedral, but I don't think it's the same anymore
Well,
because this was in 2000, 2010,
mm-hmm.
2008, that sort of time.
Yeah.
And it was a lot more serious. Like that's what I like the homilies in Spanish. They were good.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's
I
funny
think
because
they were tailoring that towards the culture though, because
yeah.
like the article said that
Well, what I would expect from
the
the Spanish Mass,
or
Shirley, is the music is a lot more. It's I mean, it's a different kind of cultural than a Novus Ordo. Very Del Señor.
that's yeah, that's the common.
Yeah, but I would
No, it's
expect
bad
but
most
I
of
would
the time.
expect the homilies, and I would expect all that to be more grounded, in fact,
Yeah,
because I think that's part of
yeah.
the culture. Men are men and women are women. Although now with the whole Latinx kind of thing, they're trying. Uh,
Is it Latinx or Latinx?
you tell me. You're technically more Hispanic than I am, right? My people are New Mexican. We're not you Chicanos or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm having like an identity crisis. Like I identify more as white than I don't know.
Well, this is why I've always said this. Hispanic isn't a race, it's an ethnicity. So that's okay.
It's an yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Like that's
yeah.
what so let me tell you this right now. My family is northern New Mexican, and this is very particular. That's why
Mm,
my dad looks like a conquistador, right? The northern New Mexicans retained what the Spanish would have called more of the Christian blood. They're a little
mm.
less native. Uh Not trying to disparage anybody, cancel me, whatever. I'm just saying that's what it is. That's a historical term. And so I think that so from my family's a very we're very Americanized Hispanic. I think my grandparents or my great grandparents on my dad's side in particular didn't speak English. On my mom's side, it was kind of like it was very like accented English, right? But my grandparents now speak fluid Spanish, fluid English. My grandpa was a Korean War veteran, like just very like
Mhm.
good for the nation state when the nation state still existed. So but that's why I think like for me especially like because it's like now with all the Black Lives Matters and all that kind of stuff, the world is trying to turn tribalistic again. It's trying to dictate you by race, which is not just a ridiculous idea because you're more likely to be killed by your own skin color than not. That's the history of the world in a nutshell. But it's also a very modern interpretation. I'm gonna have to send you this video, but there's a channel I watch. I think it's Invictus, and the question was, how did the Romans view race? And the answer is that the Romans viewed culture, but they didn't really view race. And of course, race was tied to culture more intimately geographically, but they wouldn't have been like, oh, those people are not human per se. That's like
Mhm.
kind of an invention from like chattel slavery and the age of exploration and colonization like that. So the
Well,
Romans
even
were
look
like,
into the sorry, go ahead.
no, no, I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna talk about the Acts of the Apostles. I mean,
Oh yes.
you look into the scripture and it's literally all of these different types of people from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the you see that in that moment all of those people were meant to receive Christ.
Yeah.
And so it's true. We don't really look at race as much as other people do. Rather, we, like the Romans, look at culture.
Yeah.
And so if you have a Christian culture, a Western culture, then you're more likely to assimilate together.
Mm-hmm. And this is the great beauty of the Catholic faith in particular. I think a lot of times about how the church, when the conquistadors would come over and have all these little native, these first Hispanic babies, I guess, the church was like,
Mhm.
listen, they're your children and you need to recognize them as such.
Yeah.
That's the case. And so mixed marriages, not in the way that the Catholic Church describes them, because the only mixed marriage the Catholic Church understands is when a Catholic marries a non-Catholic. That's a mixed marriage in the faith in the faith. For us,
Mhm.
pragmatically, a mixed marriage of two different races, it doesn't matter about your race. It matters to do with culture. Your wife is quite Irish. my fiance is already a mixed chick. You know, she has plenty of Irish blood in her too, and plenty of black blood. So, um, but it's all about what's tinking inside someone's soul fundamentally.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
astounding to me. Like I feel like now, because there's this thing where, there's this argument. Well, um, it's ridiculous. The Catholic Church just advances whiteness and advances white saints and stuff. And I'm like, dude, here's a weird thing. What is the greatest portrayal of Our Lady in the States?
Our Lady of Guadalupe.
An indigenous woman, really? Like, you know,
Here is indigenous.
I don't look at Our Lady of Guadalupe and snarl. I don't look at Our Lady of Lourdes and roll my eyes. I don't look at Our Lady of Akita and go, well, that's just BS, you know? And
Yeah.
but that's, no one had to tell you that. That was just naturally grilled in. Like, no one told me, listen, Our Lady Guadalupe is going to look different than the Virgin Mary when she appeared to Saint Bernadette. So you got to watch out. It was just like, cool. This is Our Lady, you know?
Yeah.
So, that's pretty much the end of the article. There's a conclusion which makes sense, which is just saying that, um, the extraordinary form is a small percentage right now, but it's growing and it should not be ignored. And it has, because it's the force of the Holy Spirit, uh, a force that is able to get us back to our traditional roots of the faith and is able to promulgate itself. I just want to read the very last paragraph. And it says, easiest of all to conform is the presence of men in the extraordinary form. With ordinary form congregations in many places being increasingly dominated by older women, the ability of the EF to retain at least an equal number of men, as well as young people, and those bringing up children, is of no small significance.
Boom.
It will always skew younger. The article talks about, thanks to YouTube, thanks to the digital space, Catholics who are making content, making art, culture, are naturally going to tradition. No one is making the best of David Haas or anything.
Wasn't David House canceled? I
Yeah,
thought he was
because of
canceled.
the I think they're allegations of sexual misconduct, which both
I shouldn't laugh at that. I'm not laughing at the sexual misconduct. I'm laughing at
well,
his terrible music.
if I may, if there's one saving grace, at least it was allegations with women. I mean, heavens. Sorry, oof. Oh,
Oh man,
yeah,
that's horrible.
I know, I know, I know.
Well, yeah, God has a plan. God definitely has a plan, and I think He's using, or rather, He's allowing us to use all of these different forms of communication. Of it's just everything's sort of working out so that young people inherit the church as it was meant to be inherited.
Nowadays, there are so many people looking for identity, and
Mm-hmm.
how sad it is, especially in this age of great loneliness, where people are finding that their tribalistic roots are not satisfactory. They don't appease the soul. The Marxist understanding of you are only to be understood by your race or your ethnicity or cultural or your pattern or speech or your class or whatever. The Catholic Church has solved this throughout all of history. The Catholic Church has a role for princes, it has a role for paupers, it has a role for sinners, and it has a role for saints. And so, good Christian culture builds upon a real natural obligation and understanding to each other about what binds us as the most important thing, which is the Mass, which is the church, which is the teachings. And I feel like one thing that makes me so excited is that we're part of that. And it's not because we want to spite the church. It's not because we've burned every single thing about our upbringings. There's a lot of things I'm extremely grateful for. Obviously, I learned the love of Jesus in the ordinary form. But it breaks my heart knowing that here was an entire treasure trove that we were told for 60 years wasn't a treasure trove. And I think to my confirmation class, who 90% of them are not practicing Catholics anymore. They're just out. And we weren't taught the faith, and we weren't taught the treasures and the richness of the faith. And I'm just so grateful that we can play a part in really kind of uncovering and rediscovering Catholicism, that we can really play a part in uncovering the beauties and the treasures of the church again.
Absolutely. And that's the other. I mean, that's why we're even doing this thing. And the Glad Trad podcast came about because we wanted to we wanted to bring people to tradition. We wanted
Mm-hmm.
to share that beautiful experience that we have every time we go to mass with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hoping to grow it. So if you could like, if you're not subscribed, like the video. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing to us. Turn on the bell notification so you know when we're dropping a new video. We drop videos pretty often.
Yeah.
I've sort of, well, we haven't really done one because we're in two different states now. But we're trying to figure it out because there's a lot of life going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have a lot of interesting topics coming up, and Jordan does a really awesome series on Catholic masculinity. Does some solo videos; those are awesome. But yeah, consider subscribing, and if you could share this with your friends, your family, if you thought this was interesting to you, maybe it might be interesting to them, and bring them into tradition. You never know.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And really a great thank you to our current subscribers, both those on YouTube and those who listen on the podcasting platforms, whether that's on Apple or Google or Stitcher or iHeartRadio. Here on YouTube, it's incredible because I was just listening to our podcast from a year ago, actually. One of our episodes was made around this time. And it's so cool that Rudy and I, it's funny because I listen to us and it doesn't sound any different. We're not putting on a show. We're just two Catholic jabronis who love the Lord,
Right.
and memes and kind of dank Catholic trad culture, and I like how it's not a polished experience or anything. It's just like us doing our thing. And, the amount of support and comments and replies back have just been absolutely great. There was a comment on our Instagram today, Rudy, where, a guy was saying like, this has kind of helped me lead back to tradition and back into the church a little bit. And thank you. And I was like, wow, that's great.
Amazing.
So we are constantly touched by your guys' prayers and your guys' support. Sharing this, liking this, sending it out, sending the good word out, listening to us is all wonderful. But really your continued prayer life has just been so many blessings for us, really. So really from the bottom of my heart and from Rudy's heart, thank you. That's absolutely incredible. We could not have imagined how fun of a year this has been doing this, huh?
Yeah. It's been really cool. I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah.
It's very awesome.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find here's a little teaser for you guys. I'm trying to find something interesting to like a nice prayer book or something nice, a nice Catholic book to rebind and give away. So keep an eye out for that. We're probably going to do that sometime soon. We're going to do a giveaway. We're going to do a raffle. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And until then, God bless you and may He keep you.
Adios.